Welcome to our new webinar. That's what we're going to talk about today. How we can successfully introduce the electronic signature in the organization using 6 steps. First, let's take a look at how we want to spend the next few minutes together. First, why should I even introduce a digital signature in my organization? So what motivation do I have behind it? Then, how do we interpret the e-signature with d.velop sign at d.velop? In the main part, we'll take a look at the 6 steps we can use to successfully introduce the e-signature in the organization. And finally, how we can collaboratively shape the next steps digitally and successfully. Let's start with the question, why should I even introduce a digital signature in the organization? Let's first take a look at the contract lifecycle. The contract lifecycle has standardized phases that every contract goes through at some point. A contract is created, it is reviewed, or it is signed, delivered, and finally archived, and may be renewed or terminated. Ideally, each sub-step is digitized. The main point that is often forgotten. The step that leads to a media break and thus to a partially digitized process is the signing step. This means that we often talk about a classic media break here, because we are leaving the digital world and going back to the analog world. If we clarify this process again, this becomes even clearer when looking at processes that are already in place in companies and organizations. In many companies and organizations, documents are still sent by mail. That means classically a document is signed by hand. We have a lot of sub-steps, long waiting times, and we are also dependent on third-party providers such as Deutsche Post. Then there are organizations and companies that say we are already doing this partially digitally, namely by email. Yes, this is partly progress, because waiting times are shortened. We are already partially digitized because we are working through the medium of email. But we have legal risks here, as we are working with scanned signatures, and not always all legally required. Formal requirements are sufficient, and only the e-signature can connect both worlds. This means a completely digital process and compliance with legal principles and regulations. What conditions? So what are the benefits of the digital signature? On one hand, we can reduce process costs, save process time, sign independently of location, which means flexibly from anywhere, whether I'm working from home, on the go, for example, by train, or classically in the office. We save resources by reducing paper usage and also decreasing our CO2 footprint, by avoiding physical meetings, for example, and thus saving travel costs or travel. Save kilometers. And we have the opportunity to actively eliminate media breaks. That was the topic from the beginning of this presentation. We have a fully digital process from the creation of the document to the signature and archiving. In the best case on just one platform. That should already cover the basics. So why I am introducing a digital signature? Now let's take a look at how we interpret the e-signature with d.velop. Sign the e-signature. d.velop is the e-signature of the d.velop platform. With that, we also see ourselves as the missing piece for digital document processes. The d.velop platform is the digitization platform of d.velop AG, where we combine our core products with the solutions of our partners to be able to fully digitize business processes. By this we mean the document process that we already saw earlier with the contract. That means we want to digitally represent every single step of the document lifecycle or the contract lifecycle. And the e-signature naturally takes over the step of signing. So what is d.velop sign? d.velop sign is a core product of d.velop sign AG. And d.velop sign is an eIDAS and GDPR compliant e-signature software that allows you to sign documents digitally in a legally secure manner. The e-signature is developed in Germany. We are operated on the Open Telecom cloud. This is a cloud solution from Telecom that relies solely on EU locations, namely Magdeburg, Beer, and Amsterdam. And we collaborate with reliable and certified trust service providers to authenticate and verify digital identities. So-called trust service providers, we rely on D-Trust and Swisscom, and in the future, also on A-Trust and Signaid, with whom we are actively in discussions How can you make signature processes digital and efficient with d.velop Sign? You have two options. On one hand, you can sign a document digitally as an individual. Pretty simple. On the other hand, you can digitally sign documents with multiple people in a shared signing process. Let's take a look at both options. Just briefly, the first option is that one or more documents are signed digitally by a single person. What documents are those? These are PDF and XML documents. You have the option to view the signing processes. On a dashboard, through an activity overview, you can switch between German and English by default. But you also have the option to reach out to us and then evaluate several languages again to implement them again, if necessary. You have the option to use all types of signatures under the EDIS regulation. This includes the simple, advanced, and qualified electronic signature. The QES is also available as standard. And all the signatures that we apply have what's called LTV capability. LTV stands for long-term validation, which means the signatures we apply have long-term validity. On the other hand, we have the digital signing process with multiple people. Here we have additional features to further customize signing processes. This includes, for example, signature packages with multiple documents, the customizing of the user interface. For example, you can incorporate your own company logo or government logo into the signing interface. We can initial documents, use templates, set signature sequences, and so on. If you want to take a closer look at this feature, feel free to use our trial version. We will share those again at the end of this presentation. That should be it for the d.velop Sign standalone version. We see the e-signature, as mentioned, as a holistic part of the document lifecycle. This means that the e-signature, as a missing piece of the puzzle, must of course be integrated into existing work environments. At d.velop Sign AG, we are talking about the levels of integration. These range from standardized solutions to very customized solutions. The standard integration includes our well-known systems, our core solutions, for example, d.velop Sign documents, but also very well-known third-party providers like SAP, Microsoft Office, or Salesforce. If these third-party providers are not sufficient for their systems, we also have the option to digitize individual processes using the d.velop Sign Process Studio through no-code and low-code applications. That means they are able to independently design digital processes as non-developers. And if that still doesn't meet your expectations, we have the option through the d.velop Sign API, which deeply integrates the e-signature into their solutions to integrate and incorporate it into their existing workflows. However, we should discuss this individually. That should be it for d.velop Sign. If you need more information about the product, feel free to visit our product page or reach out to us directly, and we will send you all the necessary information. Now let's move on to the main part of this webinar, which is the 6 steps to implementing a digital signature. What steps should I consider if I want to successfully implement the e-signature project? Of course, we're not talking about 6 steps for nothing. We would like to go through these 6 steps in detail now. The first step is the so-called requirements catalog. What's behind it? Behind the requirements catalog, we specifically understand 5 questions that you should ask yourself in advance of a signature project. Let's go through these questions. What are your specific reasons for introducing electronic signatures in your company? What is your motivation? You should keep that in mind at all times. To create motivation for this project. To motivate, inspire, and encourage other people in your company or organization part of this project, and also to get a bit excited about it, because digitalization should also be fun. The second point is, which processes and types of documents do you want to digitize and optimize? In the best case, you already know this, because then you also gain a certain understanding of processes in order to optimally take these processes to the next level. If you can't do that yet, that's no problem. Then discuss this in one of the following steps, specifically with your signature experts. The third point is, what functions and features do I really need to optimize my processes? Because more features doesn't always mean more value. It's about keeping processes simple, to solve processes as efficiently as possible and not to complicate them. Because there are people who are digitally savvy, but also those who are not so digitally inclined. And both need to be equally involved. As a fourth point, which integrations are important to you? We just talked about this topic at d.velop Sign, because the e-signature shouldn't always be considered in isolation in many cases, but rather in the whole structure of contract and document processes. So ask yourself, do I really need the e-signature on its own? Or are there important third-party systems like document management systems, ERP systems, or other office applications where I want to use the e-signature? And last but not least, ask yourself what compliance and data protection requirements the e-signature should meet. Because e-signatures are very private information from customers, suppliers, and also from your own employees that really needs to be protected. So ask yourself the question, should this confidential data remain within the EU, or would it be okay when you leave this room? Just ask yourself, is this topic important to me? Now let's move on to the second point, the selection of providers, the probably most important point, and the one you likely already knew. When it comes to selecting providers, we want to give you a few tips. There are so-called minimum criteria that should definitely be considered when it comes to an e-signature. This includes that the e-signature should be eIDAS compliant. The eIDAS regulation is the regulation in the European Union that defines how I can apply digital signatures and what requirements these signatures must meet so that they are legally valid. We've shared a link here where you can check if my provider is valid. Issue signatures. You can simply use the form from the European Commission to check their signatures. The second point is that the e-signature provider should work with a certified trust service provider. There is also an information point from the European Commission, namely the EU Trusted List. The trust service providers verify the digital identity of a person, so they ensure, yes, that this is really the person who signed this document. And here too, as I said, there's this trusted list where you can check, is this trust service provider really verified and recognized by the EU Commission? Then there's the form of GDPR compliance. By adhering to European data protection standards with the e-signature, we are, for example, also operating on a European cloud. Because many e-signature solutions are indeed cloud-based. As a fourth point, we have the eIDAS signature types. This has something to do with the trust service providers. There I have the possibility to apply simple, advanced, and qualified electronic signatures, so that I can really cover all use cases with one absolutely effective solution. And the last point, if something goes wrong, I have a personal contact who doesn't change every 2 weeks, to clarify my personal questions, if needed, and to be able to address critical cases together. That was quite intense. Ideally, you should use existing information resources to check these minimum criteria for yourself. Various providers, including d.velop, offer informational resources such as white papers and webinars. You can check references, and that's simply the best tip available in the e-signature market. Book a demo, get a presentation of the product, or would you like to start directly? Gather some initial experience by simply testing the product. How does that feel? Relieved? Do I really see this solution in action, or are there points we still need to improve? That's a general tip. Now move on to the third point. Collecting and prioritizing document types. An e-signature project is basically a relatively simple project, because compared to other digitization projects like the implementation of an ERP system or a document management system, it is very easy to implement and also very quick to use. However, there are a few points to keep in mind so that the project is successful from the very beginning. Here we have a motto. We call it small states, big thinking. Ideally, choose a specialized department or area depending on how you are positioned in your organizational model. And start with this small group. Let's take an example and start with the specialized department, HR or personnel, people and culture, however you name this department. And in this area, you now collect all the YARD document types that need to be signed once and list them in a table. We'll also do another example of what that can look like. Why are we doing this? Once you have listed the document types, you have the opportunity to prioritize your processes. Because the document types that they need to sign most frequently should be digitized first, so that the effect in the organization becomes immediately clear and motivation is created. And in the second step, once you have listed these document types, you should have them evaluated by a lawyer to know how I can digitally sign which document. That was very theoretical. Let's take a concrete example. On the left side, you can see a table of possible document types that are signed in HR. Additionally, you see the frequency of how often each document is signed, and based on that, a priority assessment. The documents that are signed most often are at the top. The ones that are signed the least are at the bottom. And in the second step, you now bring in a lawyer who will evaluate them for you. Okay, what are the legal formal requirements for this document and how can you sign it digitally? With which signature level? We at d.velop AG, we are a software provider. With d.velop Sign, you can use all the types of signatures. However, we are not allowed to provide legal advice. Of course, we have documents that you can work with. That means guidance on how you can sign which specific document. However, this is not a binding legal advice. If you want these, go to your trusted lawyer and get your document type secured. That was already the third step. In the fourth step, let's take a look at how this topic will be continued, namely by digitizing the initial signature processes. We are now back in the HR department. That means we will book, as mentioned earlier, the trial version from the provider. And in the second step, we determine a test group that can test this trial version for a certain period of time. This could be, for example, 3 HR personnel and 3 other employees who work with this HR department. Well, let's convert the prioritized document types to digital signature processes. That is, the documents that are particularly often are still being signed in analog form are now being signed digitally. Then you can, because you have a lot of documents, gather detailed feedback from the test group and consolidate learning experiences. That means you'll get feedback on what worked well and what didn't. Where were things unclear for me? Does it work? Where were things unclear for me? And can you approach the respective provider directly with this feedback? And the provider can then offer you additional support options to solve these open questions. This is how you create motivation, transparency in the implementation, and initial success experiences. And then the project just continues by further digitizing the next signature processes on their priority list and thus maximizing their potential until they finally have all of them. They have digitized the processes on their list, and that goes relatively quickly as well, because they have already gained learning effects. You know how the tool works. You know what questions come up, so you can simply repeat the process from the last 3 steps. And we are already at the final process step, which is also the most fun, because when you, as the HR department or a pioneering area, when you have achieved successes with this solution, you can also share your successes with other areas. You can position yourself as a digital innovator within the company or organization and inspire other departments also to rely on the electronic signature. In our specific example, it was the HR department, and that can now create motivation for purchasing, for accounting, or for executives or other areas. So, step by step, digitize each signature process in the company or organization. And that's it. That's how you do it. Now, there's a little tip. How do you get other people excited? Of course, there are several options. We at d.velop offer what's called an EOI calculator. In this EOI calculator, we first capture what the time and monetary savings are that we have with e-signature. That means you can see once what does it cost me, analog signature processes versus digital signature processes, and how much time do I save. You are welcome to request this document in a personal conversation with us and fill it out together with our signature experts. That means we can gladly do this live with you, and you can also track it transparently, how the costs are incurred. And with that, we've already reached the last step of this presentation. So how do we tackle a digital signature project together? Actually, you can answer this question for yourself when you take the first steps of the 6-step plan, gather some information about what your requirements are, and then book either a demo or a test phase, depending on whether you want to speak directly with a contact person or if you just want to test it out freely at first. And you want to get a first overview. This is our offer, what we can do for you. And in that regard, thank you for staying loyal to us. Also again in this presentation, and we look forward to taking the next steps together soon. Thank you much.